Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
Hey, it's William, and welcome to today's episode of the Catalytic Leadership Podcast. Each week, we tackle a topic related to the field of leadership. My goal is to ensure that you have actionable steps you can take from each episode to grow in your own leadership. Growth doesn't just happen. My goal is to help you become intentional about it. Each week, we spotlight leaders from a variety of fields, organizations, and locations. And my goal is for you to see that leaders can be catalytic no matter where they are or what they lead. I draw inspiration from the stories and journeys of these leaders, and I hear from many of you that you do too. Let's jump into today's interview. I am so excited today to have Andrea Johnson on the podcast. Andrea empowers others to take control of their lives and change their future. As an adoptive parent who grew up on the mission field of Seoul, South Korea, navigating mental and physical wellness, she learned that emotional resilience must be earned. Uncovering her own voice became the key to the process that allows her clients to do the same. Andrea works with ambitious female leaders, founders, community leaders, and public officials who feel stifled and have grown unsatisfied with their current level of impact. She facilitates improved communication and corporate culture in women-owned or operated teams. Her passion is equipping female leaders to define a new culture by trusting their own ability to think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively. Andrea, I'm so excited you're here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I tell you what, when you read it, it sounds amazing.
Oh, my.
I'm like, that's me?
That's you. and that's where I want to start. I want to talk about you. I would love to hear some of your story. I mean, I hit some of the hot points there, but how did you get started and develop as a leader?
You know, I was one of those strong kids that if you're of a certain age, it was like the Dobson strong-willed child, you know, and you know, my poor mom was the one who had to chase me around, and while my dad was in seminary and, you know, that kind of thing. But I was headstrong. I had lots of ability to think well and move, and I could figure things out. Right. I mean, I was just that kid. But it just wasn't, you know, I'm from the South and from the evangelical culture, and that's not kind of embraced all the time. Growing up on the mission field, the beauty of growing up on the mission field, though, was it gave me this ability to see a real ecumenical culture, to see in the missionary community, but also to be involved cross-culturally, to understand things from a completely different perspective. And going to school at an international school with kids from 65 different countries helped me completely. I didn't have a worldview that was just in the United States. I had a global worldview, and coming back to the States, trying to fit in with that was difficult. Yeah. You know, I learned we were on furlough in 6th grade, and I learned real quick that I needed to stop talking about Korea, because as I walked up to a group of girls in a very small Southeast Texas town, I heard, well, here comes Miss Korea this and Miss Korea that.
Oh, my.
Right. And we learn that stuff real early, don't we? We learn to, if we want to be accepted, we learn to fit in. And so my leadership journey was a whole lot of fitting in. And then every once in a while I'd pop out and say, but wait a minute, you know, and then I'd pop back down and fit in, because we all have that desire to belong. And I personally, that is one of my top 3 core values, is belonging. And so I dove even deeper into figuring out how to belong in the culture that I had been raised in and that I chose to be in. And eventually I hit a spot where it's like, there's too much incongruence here. I just can't do this. And I'd love to blame it on my job, where, you know, I didn't have enough money, or I was given a promotion without a raise, or, you know, I'd love to blame it on those kinds of things. But the reality is, William, we all know that we hit a place in life where we have to decide, am I going to take all of those conditionings and teachings and assumptions and belief systems that I've been handed? Or am I going to think critically for myself, examine what comes into my life? And if you're a spiritual person, be able to say, am I going to be able to trust what God has given me to be able to understand things? You have to hit that point. And when I hit that point, it was a scary journey. But it's been about 10 years where I just said, I need to really look at this stuff. And much of it I still retain, right? I mean, once we start looking, unless it's a place where we really need to break out of, we realize, oh, I can actually have my opinion. I can actually lead other people. And I'm a talker. I mean, when we met before, pre-interview, we talked for like an hour. We were scheduled for 30 minutes. I relate to people well. I love relating to people. And knowing that in my job, I couldn't necessarily do that as well as I wanted to because I managed people, right? So managing means keeping the status quo. Right. I decided I'd rather teach people and coach people and encourage people to lead and to have a greater impact. So that was kind of how I branched out and started that big journey. Yeah.
You know, I love how you define management, keeping the status quo. You know, just hearing that, it does not excite one atom of my being. And I can tell the same is for you, right?
It shouldn't.
And I think every leader listening would resonate with that as well.
Sure.
Like, it's like, I mean, do we have to manage as part of how we lead? We have to do some management things, sure. But leadership is so much greater and so much better.
Yes. And when I would have people come into my office, and that's, you know, as a relator, that's just, they do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I worked in university academic medicine for 23 years. So I would have everybody from a first of the rung secretary or administrative assistant all the way up to the chair of the department or the head of research administration, literally landing in my office because I created an environment that was safe and an environment that was peaceful. And I was a good relator, and they would come and sit and talk to me. And I learned so many things about people. And I learned that there are people who are fine with, number one, being an employee. There are people who are fine with being told what to do. They need that definition. They need that box, and their life is outside of that. And I realized, okay, those are not my people. That's okay. And then there are people who are constantly struggling, you know, constantly quit this job today. I'm like, you just took that job. Or, you know, I mean, former employees would come back because they had walked through, you know, I had worked with them while they were working with me, and, or I'd helped train them and lead them. And they would come back and say, okay, so I really hate this job. I'm like, because you're not, and this is where I started like diving deep into why you're not honoring who you are, right? You're taking a job for the money, or you're taking a job because somebody sold you on something, or you're taking a job because you're still trying to, like I did, fit into that mold of what you think people want. And, you know, my heart can only break so many times for people. And I've cried with people. I literally had young researchers who were brand new faculty say, when I finally left the University of Virginia, especially this one young guy come in, brilliant. I mean, one of those rock star people that already had, you know, millions of dollars in grant funding. And he said, what am I going to do when you're gone? I'm like, what do you mean? You're on the fast track, dude. And he said, no, but you give me such good advice. I'm like, I'm just a phone call away. I mean, it doesn't mean you need to be able to find those people that you can talk to. And I wanted to be that person. And I wanted to be that person for people who really wanted to grow, because those were the highlights. But just as many people came into my office to complain because we were in a big system, and I can't fix the system. I'm like, well, I know that. You just have to know. I mean, there's a certain amount that you have to accept. So when I talk about managing, there are things that we have to manage as leaders. But the definition of the term really is making sure that things don't go off the rails. That's what managing is, right? And so if you're willing to go in and do change management, that's very different.
Yes, it is.
And then you can make a real difference. But if you're not willing to do change management, then literally you need to work within the systems that are there. If they fit you, awesome. You found a great place for you. If they don't, let's talk.
Love that. You talk a lot about intentional optimism. When we talked previously, this fascinates me, and I'd love for you to share more about that. I don't know that I have heard anybody put those two words together before.
It's my own creation. I make words up.
I love it.
I do. I don't take the escalator down. I take the downilator. So it makes life a lot more
That's
fun.
So great.
Yeah. And, there are certain words that we have to use that don't make any sense. It's feats, so, but I do things like that. And part of that is to just keep myself amused, because I think when we laugh and we're happy, we tend to do things with more fervor, and life is not worth living if you can't laugh. So when it comes to being an intentional optimist, this goes back to the story of my mother, my mom was a pastor's wife and a missionary wife, and turns out an amazing project manager, and was head of all of the volunteers for the Red Cross for Asia and the Pacific, and couldn't get paid for that because of the fact that she was a missionary, and nobody else could get paid, so she couldn't. She would have gotten colonel's pay, right? She was that high. But my mother was this amazing, strong woman who was smart, but a little bit like me. She was called Motor Mouth, and but she was raised, she was born in like 44. So she was raised in that environment of women are seen and not heard. And, but she worked to put my dad through seminary. She went to 14 different schools before she graduated cum laude from the University of Maryland through the military base. She was smart, but she just couldn't catch a break half the time. And she chose to work within the system that she was in, which was this like Southern kind of evangelical culture. And part of that was because she felt called by God to be there, right? So there's a certain amount of that I don't want to disparage at all. But when they came off the mission field, she went to work my dad came back to work for the home office, and she went to work for a local country club as like a marketing director, and then ended up at the home office working as an administrative assistant. And she retired as an administrative assistant, and she could have run circles around all of the men who were higher up than her. And she was diagnosed, all of this she did, diagnosed with lupus and then breast cancer. And we lost her in February of 2017 to breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer. And that was the year I turned 50. And I had just turned 50 in 2016, excuse me. And so I was just a brand new 50. She was in hospice, and then we lost her in February. And something just clicked. And I said, I'm not doing this anymore. What do I believe in? Why do I believe it? And I'm a little bit of, believe it or not, a private person when it, I know that sounds crazy, but I'm a little bit of a private person when it comes to truly sharing who I am. And I don't even know that private's the right word. I think a lot of it was afraid to share who I really am. And so I didn't want to speak at her memorial service or anything. And, but when it came down to it, I did. And, when I speak, I can speak pretty powerfully. And, one of the things I realized was, because when a conviction hits, right, I'm going to share it. And I'm known for having not done that with a lot of forethought before in my life. But, I realized that one of the things I loved about her was that no matter what she was dealing with, even when she was in this smaller position and kept getting passed over for promotions, and, when I knew she could do all this other stuff, she had this personality that always saw the joy in things, and she could express joy, and she could express, it was effervescent, like a bottle of champagne. You would pop the cork and she would the bubbles would just come out. And part of that was her personality. Part of it was she had learned to do that because she decided, she knew for 15 years, I'm basically going to die of this disease and I'm going to live. She had grandbabies, she had, daughters, and she had a husband, and she's like, I'm not quitting. Yeah. So what I saw was a really strong woman learn how to be joyous in really hard situations. And I didn't quite know how to do that because I don't know if you do the are you familiar with the Enneagram?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, here's a
I'm
good
a
one.
solid 5. Yeah.
Oh, that actually makes sense. Here, you ready for this one?
Yeah.
So, I am a self-preservation, counterphobic, 6-wing 7, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah. So sixes,
Interesting.
sixes are the most difficult to pin down.
Yeah.
We are on a spectrum of phobic to counterphobic. And then of course there's the 3 types. There's the self-preservation or the social or the one-to-one. And so what all that means is that I'm a very strong wing 7. So that's why I'm like, if it's not fun,
Yeah.
But what that means is I'm always looking to make sure that my environment is peaceful and happy. And
Yes.
I'm all about kind of making sure the systems work. I do kind of get a little bit caught in how things could go wrong, but mostly I'm just looking for preventing them from going wrong, right? It's like, so I can look down the road and say, how can I make this work?
Yeah.
So, but because of that, I do have this bent towards anxiety. And I always have. And I have a history of bulimia and depression. And, so all of that is very real in my life. And I believe understanding myself has helped me get to a place where, oh, I could actually do something different. This is my bent, but I could actually live in a way that brings me joy. And come to find out, when a 6 is in a really healthy place, they kind of lean towards the 9, which is a very calm place to be. Yeah. My husband's a 9. It's a little bit frustrating sometimes. But when I looked at my mom, I think my mom was a very strong 3, quite honestly. The entertainer, she's like lots of fun, and she's very much a performer. She was either a 3 or a 7, but all that to say, I wanted to use the word sanguine. I said, she's a very sanguine woman, which is a very old-fashioned word. We use the DISC. I know you're a DISC consultant, and the sanguine is the influencer. The sanguine is that side of the personality. And what I really wanted was, I wanted to say, I'm going to intentionally, and I kept using that word, I'm going to intentionally pursue optimism as a lifestyle. I want to pursue joy. I want to pursue those things. And I knew I was sort of doing that, but now I want to make it a purposeful thing. So I started writing down, and you'll like this as a 5, all the stuff, pages and pages and pages and pages of all the words and all the things that I thought I believed. And I have it, it's just like, I'm never throwing that stuff away because it's so valuable. And then I kind of put them into categories and realized I had 6 major categories. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to call this, but these were kind of my principles. Wow. And so what I came up with was, the first was optimistic, because that's very clear. I want to be optimistic, which includes hope and confidence and prepared and positive. Present. If you're not present, then you can't, and that being present includes having what I call a grown-up sense of wonder, not childlike. If I understand how things work and they still work, then that's better wonder than not understanding how they work. So optimistic, wonder, energetic, which is producing joy and producing energy and excitement. Courageous, which is perfect for a 6. We have to dive into that all the time and say, whatever happens, I'm in. And so that's a constant reminding, like you read in my bio, we learned that resilience is earned. Resilience doesn't happen when you can't just decide to be resilient. Some people are naturally so. Most of us have to fall down and get back up in order to develop that resilience. So courageous includes resilience, being undaunted. Like, I can look ahead and see that is Mount Everest, but you know what? I'm climbing it anyway. I'm not going to let obstacles stop me. And as an entrepreneur, you have to do that. So the 5th one is wise, and just wanting to, and honoring the wisdom that comes with having been around the sun a few times, and just realizing that I have a lot of life to offer people, and that my brain really is quite amazing. And I believe that I have been given a lot of wisdom. It's not something that I ever wanted to shout, because we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to be humble, but when I share with someone who's going through something, I've been through this. I would like to let me give you this piece of advice, or would you like my advice?
Yeah.
Every once in a while it comes unsolicited, and I'll just say, here's my unsolicited advice to you. But wisdom includes also respect, understanding how to respect ourselves and other people, and being willing to see the world for more than just what I can see, perspective. And then the last one is what I call them tenets, is intentional, which so the optimistic and the intent and the intentional bookend it. And intentional means having a plan, working your plan, preparing. What are the things that I could do? Seneca said that luck is when opportunity meets preparation.
Yeah.
And so that's what intentional is. And when I'm walking somewhere, like when I was working, I would wear heels, of course. And when I'm walking somewhere, I had 2 or 3 people say, I always know when it's you coming down the hall. It's like, you're very intentional in the way you walk. You're purposeful. I'm like, well, I'm going somewhere. I'm not wandering.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So those are very physical examples. But when it came down to it, I said that I thought that intentional optimism was a plan. I thought it was like, this is how we live. But as I've grown through learning and trying to apply them, and I work with a group of ladies on a monthly basis in a small group program, and we walk through all 6 of them twice a year. And part of that is goal setting and reflection. And as I've done that, I've realized they're not a plan. Intentional optimism is a lifestyle to live out the things that are deeper, your convictions, what I call your core values and your beliefs and your, those kinds of things. And so now I present it a little differently. It's a lifestyle. And I'm flabbergasted when some of my clients will take just the 1-page intentional optimism and look at the tenets. And I had one girl said, I put it in my notebook and I went to a meeting and I came back because I was very frustrated about this thing. And I'm like, I'm going to be courageous. I am not going to, okay, And so what it became now, and the way I present it, is it's a lifestyle of living out how I want to live. And I kind of look back and say, oh, this was my remedy for being a 6 wings. Right. But we teach what we learn and what we know. And so that's intentional optimism. It's not really a nutshell. I don't do anything really in a nutshell.
That's awesome. No, I think that was fantastic. I love the purposefulness of it. I love the intentionality of it. You have defined where you want to be, who you want to be.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to be. This is who I want to be. Now I just have to build a bridge from here to there.
Right.
Once you've defined the 2 points.
Right.
And I think so many people don't define the 2 points. They know kind of sort of where they are ish, maybe sort of, but their self-awareness is fuzzy. And when you say, where do you want to go? They can give you a couple of things maybe, but it's not clearly defined. I love that you have so clearly defined that. I think that is so helpful. And I know our listeners are going to really appreciate that. I think you would challenge them to define this for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. If intentional optimism is a lifestyle that you think will work for you, you can just download the thing and download the 1-pager and get them. It's free. But, and I'm happy to share that with everybody. It's not, if you're not somebody who needs that, then take the time to look and do the reflection in the mirror. And it's like the evaluated experience is the best. Yes. So take that time. I would definitely say challenge yourself to look at what you need. What's your recipe? Because so many clients say, well, I want to be better at blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay. Go do so. Our time here is done. Did you pay me?
What's your plan?
Right. It's like, I'm glad you paid me up front because this was real simple. And, and I don't really get that snarky. I mean, unless I just really feel like there's a client that can do that. But most of the time, I'm like, well, let's back it up and let's define that. And that's why I work with women on a monthly basis on goals. We don't want to define ourselves with goals and break ourselves down to where we're constantly missing them and setting ourselves up for failure. So sometimes we set intentions for the month, but you're right. Having it, even if it's just a midpoint of where you want to be, makes the difference because then it's remember Joe versus Volcano?
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of the movie, when he's out on this walking down this dirt road and he gets to this crossroads, like, oh, where do I go? Or when you're watching, like my son is almost 15, so we're watching Fast and Furious movies, and they'll go off-road, right? They'll go off-road, and when you're off-road, you don't have a map, right? And so you're just on an adventure. Well, what if you go off a cliff? But when you have a map or when you have a plan, then you know where you're going. And so all of those things are very helpful.
You and I grew up in evangelical church culture, right? And we spent a great deal of time there. And so often in that world, and this may be, a bit shocking for people who are not in that world, but in that world, so often, like you alluded to earlier, women are not valued in leadership roles. In fact, in some places, they are barred from those roles. You believe that women are uniquely qualified to be leaders. And this is something that you and I have spent some time talking about, because we agree on this topic that God has given gifts of leadership to both men and women to lead in all kind of contexts, so many different places, so many different ways. And when we devalue that, we are devaluing not just the gift that God's given, but we're devaluing the person that he created in his image. You talk about why women are uniquely qualified to be leaders. I would love for you to unpack that just a little bit.
Well, if you want to go all the way back to Genesis,
all the way back.
Eve's an example of stepping out in leadership. Unfortunately, it wasn't the greatest example, but she did. And if you want to look at evangelical culture and interpretation of certain things, women were created to complete the whole, right? And therefore, you can't have one without the other. And if you can't have one without the other, then one is not the leader over the other. And sorry, I just gave myself cold chills. These are truths, William, that, I shared, I've been working through the last 3 to 5 years. These are truths that are very well ingrained in me. I call them your ABCs, your assumptions, your beliefs, and your conditioning. And breaking out of those are some of the hardest work that you will ever do. And if you are not willing to challenge them, you will not ever grow as a leader. So whatever it is that you have in your ABCs, that is what you need to challenge. For me, the very first place was to challenge some of my assumptions and beliefs and very highly conditioned understanding of women's roles in different places. And I think women are so uniquely qualified because we are created with a little bit of a different mindset than men. And there's a reason for that. Especially in the evangelical culture, we talk about how we're both equal in God's sight, but we're created differently. And a lot of times people want to say that's different roles. And I'm like, well, maybe it's different ways of fulfilling the role. Women are by nature usually more nurturing. Women are by nature, believe it or not, more logical. Women, and this is documented. I had 2 fascinating conversations with financial planners, and one was like a divorce attorney that worked with women in financial matters. So for 3 years, I did a podcast where I interviewed other women leaders, and it taught me so much. But one of the things I learned was that women make better financial investors for the simple fact that for 2 things. Number 1, they invest in things that they understand and use. And number 2, they're not usually motivated by competition. They don't need to beat the other person. I almost said they don't need to beat the other guy, right?
Yeah, right.
And they don't. So women tend to be really savvy investors. They invest in things that are really solid. Women were the first to invest in Amazon. I mean, they understood what it meant to get toilet paper delivered to their door. So learning these things about women kind of changed the way I saw women as leaders. And women tend to be fabulous communicators because we tend to be very good relators. These are all still, and there are plenty of people who would break this down and say, those are stereotypes. There's a certain amount of it that is, but there's always a reason for a stereotype. I mean, some of it is nefarious, some of it is not, but there's usually a reason for a stereotype. And I think that especially coming out of the pandemic with so many things getting challenged in politics and the way we do business and working from home. I loved some of the silly videos about how women were able to handle all the Zoom meetings and things when men couldn't, and
Right,
the baby coming in and fry the chicken and clean the toilet and all of that while they're like in a suit on an executive call.
right.
Women can do that kind of thing generally because we've been trained to do it.
Yeah.
And there are ways in which we have been raised in the Western culture, especially, that are advantageous to us stepping into leadership roles, except for the mindset that we've been told that we can't. So we're uniquely designed and uniquely equipped to do it. Well, not equipped. We're uniquely designed and kind of conditioned in certain ways, but in other ways, we still have so much to overcome in the areas of mindset and equipping because women still get paid 70 cents on the dollar. Women still won't apply for a job unless they think they're 100% qualified, whereas a man, 60% qualified. And that's all conditioning in that ABC quotient, right? It's just, that's all conditioning that. And one of the things that I learned about myself is that I'm not that woman. I don't apply for jobs I'm 100% qualified for. Those sound boring. And so I learned
that's fantastic.
Yeah. I learned that I could apply for a job. And if they asked me are you familiar with these data or programs? Right. And it's like, yes, I am familiar. Google, what does that say? And let me tell you,
that's awesome.
I interviewed maybe from the time I was 21 till I was, I guess the last real interview I had was 45 or 6, right? Because I switched departments at UVA. I probably only had 10 or 12 job interviews. Because when I get in a room, I can get the job. So it's rare for me to not get a job. And one that I applied for at UVA, I went from research administration back into the School of Medicine, and I applied for the job and I got a great interview. And I sat down with people and I was like, this is really good. I thought it went really well. Come to find out, it was one of those situations where they already had somebody identified. And they needed to prove that they could interview at least one more person.
Right.
Well, in the room was the comptroller, the head of one of the divisions for the Department of Medicine, and the head of the Department of Otolaryngology. And I left that meeting thinking, oh, this was a great interview. And then I hear back a week later, so we already had this person identified and we're giving her the job because she's coming up the rank. I mean, it just makes sense, right? It's another woman. Sure. I'm not going to, and even so, even if it was a man, but you impressed us so much that we want to develop a job for you. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So these are things I stumbled into. And the more I reflect and I look back, I'm like, these are things that all women could have.
Yes.
These are things that all women could develop. And it wasn't that I had that much self-confidence. I was just a great performer. I could just walk in and, well, what would you do in this situation? And it's like, oh, let me turn on my high school acting. Let me think, how would I act that out? And I just would. So what I love to do is work with people, and especially women, and especially women who are newer in some of their supervisory or leadership roles, or who really want to elevate up and be able to say, oh, actually, even the ones who have gotten the promotions, but they've done the technical work, but they don't have the leadership skills that they need to be there.
Yes.
And so those are the ones I'm like, oh, you have all the technical stuff. We don't have to work on any of that. Let's work on you, because somebody saw something in you. So that's kind of how I want to do that with people and work with people. And I think it's just really important to recognize that women have these skills that we don't realize we have. Those are not skills that are, people don't, I mean, I listened to another podcast recently because I'm going to do an interview, and it's like this career series. And it's like, you have talked about all the little things to do with your resume and all the things to do with your network, but let's talk about you, right? Let's talk about who you are, and that you don't have to wait until you're 100% qualified. So those are the things I like to focus on.
That's so good. Between the two of us, we are going to get this message out.
I hope so.
We're gonna.
I hope so. At least to Virginia.
Absolutely. We can cover at least the state of Virginia, no doubt about it. You mentioned the DISC earlier, and
Yes.
and you too, you're a certified DISC consultant and trainer. Why do you think the DISC is such a great tool? Why do you think this is something that is helpful, no matter where you are or what you're leading?
For me to be able to take a little cheat sheet into a retail establishment that I've been going to for a year where they'd been fighting with management and to put it up on the wall and then come back the next time. And literally they met me at the door and said, oh my gosh, within 15 minutes, we'd all figured out how we were communicating and it made all the difference in the world. And it was a piece of paper. So I think it speaks for itself sometimes, except, but a better explanation would be when I understand the language that you speak, or when I can recognize the language you speak, then I can meet you where you are. I grew up in Seoul, South Korea. They love to speak English over there. They did in the 70s and 80s, dating myself, and they do now. My family just went back this last summer, and they all love to speak English. They take English in school the way we take Spanish, right? It's just, they do that. And yet at the same time, I wanted to learn Korean. So I learned how to speak some Korean to them. And I still watch K-dramas to this day. And now I have to have the subtitles on, but it just is fascinating to me to listen to the language. But I took Spanish in high school because for some reason, as a high schooler, I didn't understand the beauty of what I could have had if I had been immersed in the culture and taken Korean while I was there. But because of that, I understand a lot of words in Spanish. And because of that, I understand a lot of words in French. And because of that, because of Korean, I understand what other people are trying to say when they're from another Asian country trying to speak English because of the speech patterns. Right. When I go to another country, if I want to know where the bathroom is, and they look at me and I say, where's the bathroom? And they look at me with this question on their face, like, I don't know what you're talking about. If I say, where is the bathroom? It won't make it any better.
Right.
And you know this, William. We do this to each other. So
Absolutely.
Imagine, but if I say, ¿Dónde está el baño? Right? Or 화장실 어디 있어요? Then I'm speaking Spanish or I'm speaking Korean and they go, oh, well, it's right over here. Right. Yeah. And I think it's really important to realize that we all have a type of language that we speak in our communication style. Yeah. And when we talked earlier about Enneagram, I'm like a geek for all this stuff. I knew my Myers-Briggs, my Enneagram, my DISC, all of it. But when we understand someone else's language and we're trying to bridge that gap, like we talked about, it makes all the difference in the world. And for me to be able to guide other teams through, if you just talk, like I'm meeting next week with a group and they already know that they've got one person that's just a really high D. And how do I talk to this person? Oh, well, do it in bullet points, right? And they're like, oh, okay. And even with my boss, when I was at the University of Virginia, 6'3", blonde hair, blue eyed male MBA, right? That's the leader, right? In the university setting, I learned he was a D. And so I would send him an email after I'd done all this work. Here's the bullet points. If you want the explanation, it's below. It makes all the difference in the world when you speak someone else's language. Yeah. They are so grateful. When I meet a Korean on the street or I'm sure you have plenty of these where you are, a dry cleaning, right? Or a restaurant. When I say something in Korean, they're like, oh, you spoke my language. It makes them feel seen, right? Yes. So when you understand your DISC and how to recognize other people's DISC, and their type, then you can help them feel seen. You can communicate better. I think that's why it's so important. So I layer the work that I do with my core values, wanting to know who I am, and then how I communicate with my DISC, and then how I live it out with intentional optimism. So that's how I work with all of those.
What a great way to put those pieces together to be so purposeful, so intentional. Let me ask you, Andrea, how do you stay on top of your game? How do you continue to grow and develop the leadership skills that you are going to need a year from now or 5 years from now to become that version of you?
I read. but I also, I hire a coach. Right now I have two coaches that I pay. One for
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. So one
Yeah.
is specifically a speaking coach.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I record myself when I'm actually doing these podcasts. And she's helped me learn how to express my message better. So that's my goal this year, is to become more of a speaker. And I have several things on the books. But the other coach is very much in the area of personal and growth and development, and developing my offers. And so I work with her on very different things, and I look inside a lot, and I look for all the areas that need to be challenged. So that's one way that I grow. The other is I have this insatiable curiosity. And if there was one thing that I could say to people, you need to develop, it's curiosity. Because, and I really wanted to come up with this test that I could give to people, and I was going to call it the curiosity quotient, and this was going to be my big breakout thing. And then I looked it up online, and somebody already did it. But here's the deal. There is no cure for curiosity.
Yes.
And curiosity may have killed the cat, but the cat has 9 lives.
That's right.
And when you're curious about a subject, you're going to be interested in it. When you're curious about yourself, you're going to learn about yourself. When you're curious about others, you will learn about others. And as long as I think you can maintain that curiosity, that's what keeps me moving. Why does that happen that way? Oh, why? That's my question. Always ask why.
Yes. A lot of people might be listening to this or watching you on the YouTube channel and thinking, wow, she's just got it all together. Like, her career as an entrepreneur must have been just straight up and to the right.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
No struggles, no challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right? That's how it works for everybody. Not.
Nope.
What are some of the things that you have had to wrestle through in your entrepreneurial journey?
The biggest one is being true to my own personal message and my own personal who I am as a person. And that's part of, if you're going to be a thought leader, if you're going to be a keynote speaker, if you're going to be a coach, quite frankly, you can be a really good coach and sit and ask people questions and never divulge your own stuff ever. That's completely possible. But if you want to lead people and you want to be genuine and you want to be authentic, you have to know yourself. Yeah. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time setting boundaries. You'll have a hard time figuring out how to relate to people, because you're always trying to, what are the rules in this particular relationship, right? So the hardest thing for me is breaking out of that shell of all those ABCs, those assumptions, beliefs, and conditioning of, this is what I'm supposed to look like. And even just making sure that makeup is done and I'm wearing a good color for video. And we all have those things that we want to be professional, William. We want to be a good leader. Yep. But being willing to say, I don't have it all together. Being willing to say, I don't have the answers. I will go look for them. I will help you look for them. That's what we have to do as parents. That's what we have to do as leaders. That's what we have to do as coaches. And I would say that is the biggest hurdle for me. That, and honestly, money.
Yeah.
I mean, I come from literally a deacon in not the too far past quoted the old adage of, Lord, you keep them humble, we'll keep them poor, about his pastor. And, as people in ministry, I mean, we joke about being raised in evangelical culture. I like to say I have it in my DNA because I'm genetically predisposed. My grandfather was a deacon. My father was a pastor and then a missionary, and then worked at a mission sending agency. I met my husband at seminary. My husband is a pastor, and I teach Bible study. And it's just very easy to get caught in this idea that we're not supposed to be paid well, that we're not supposed to ask for money for our services. I'm still surprised when I get an email that says, because I'll tell people, here's my fee schedule. Tell me what your budget is. Will that work for you? Yeah. And I got an email this morning that said, we met about our budget. We can only pay you this much for a keynote. Is that okay? I looked at my husband, I said, and it just, these are things that every entrepreneur has to get over. Every entrepreneur deals with the whole imposter thing, or right, this lack of confidence, or understanding that what we have to offer is real. And almost every entrepreneur has to deal with some kind of money mindset. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, that's not going to go well for you. And it takes a little time. So, but every single piece, this is the resilience piece again. Every single time we do it, we build more courage. Every single time we do it, we build more confidence. And then that's where resilience comes up in. Yeah. Resilience is the definition of that is how fast you can bounce up from falling down. Yeah. So being able to develop that kind of resilience. And I know that a lot of your listeners and your clients are marketing people. They know all about what it's like to put stuff out there that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you've got to be willing to take a risk. And if they're agency owners, they've got to be willing to learn what it means to have a good money mindset and how to make a good profit and how to take care of their people if they have employees. And these are all things that every entrepreneur has to work through. So I'm not exempt. I'm just really good at, like I said, I can put on a good show, but my goal too is to present that not toxic optimistic side, not, everything's going to be fine, but the realistic, intentional, if you do these things, and if you're willing to confront these things in the mirror, and if you need somebody to stand there, I'll stand there with you.
Yeah. Right.
But if you're willing to confront those things in order to grow, you too can lead. You too can do all of this.
You're a continual learner, Andrea, and I know that part of that involves the books that you read. Mm-hmm. You've mentioned several times that you're a reader. Is there a book that has played a really significant part of your journey that you would recommend to every leader listening? You got to put this on your to-read list if you've never read it.
Yeah, if you've not read Atomic Habits, you might be under a rock, but
yeah. But a fantastic read.
There are others that have influenced my journey in different ways, but not every leader needs those, but every leader, I think, needs to understand the science behind habits. And 100%. If you don't want to go down to that kind of science, there are a couple of other habit books out there, but we need to understand that automation in any form frees us up to do other things. So if it's automating your email sequences that go out for marketing, that frees you up to do other things. If it's automating how you get your coffee in and your study in the morning, or your quiet time, or your meditation, or whatever it is, if you're automating those because you have a habit, that frees your brain up to do other things. All of it is based on a habit. And, the greatest inventors talk about not making things as, they talk about making these a system. When you look at all of the biggest changes in the way we've done business and manufacturing, it's all based on systematizing things and making little habit changes. And I love the way Clear puts it. It's like just an atomic move, little bitty. I've used the concept of habit stacking with my son. When he was little, like, every night we do these things. Here's the list. And first we get him in the routine of taking a bath every night. And then we get him in the routine of bath and the brush of teeth. And then we get him in all of those things. I've taught to my group. I don't have like authority to teach it, but we've walked through it 4 times, Atomic Habits. And I learn something every single time.
That's so good. I love that book too.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Typically, people walk away from an episode like this with one big idea. If you could define what that one thing is that you want people to walk away with, what would you say?
If you want to have impact, you have got to have a clear understanding of who you are, how you uniquely communicate, and the source of your unique authority. Because if you don't, you will always be under somebody else's standard, somebody else's vision, somebody else's idea of what you're supposed to be. That is my challenge. And for me, that means understanding core values. And then, of course, building upon that. But that is the main thing. If you want to have if you're not interested in impact, no big deal. But if you want to have, and if you're not making the impact you want, I challenge you, look. Do you really know yourself? Do you understand how you communicate and where your unique authority comes from? Because our unique authority comes from who we are. It doesn't come from anything that anybody's ever given us.
Yeah.
When I can sit here, shoulders back, and say those things to you, it's because I believe them and because I know them in my core.
Yes. Andrea, this has been so helpful today. I know a lot of people are going to want to stay connected with you and continue to learn from you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Well, I am the intentional optimist. So you can find me pretty much anywhere at the intentional optimist. My website has my podcast is on there, and that is called Stand Tall and Own It. And so there's plenty of places to find me, but pretty much anywhere with the intentional optimist, as long as you put the in front of it, is going to get you there.
Thank you for being so generous today, Andrea. This has been so helpful, so kind, and so insightful. And I know so many people have benefited. So thank you.
Good. Thank you. It is my pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.